Welcome to MSUA's Game Changers Live, where we speak with satellite and mobile connectivity thought leaders about where new technologies are headed and share with you what you need to know about the future of satellite solutions and connectivity. I'm your host for today, Lisa Dreer, and I'd like to introduce our guest for today, Joel Schroeder. He is the Director of Land Mobile at Intelsat. Welcome to the show, Joel.
Thank you, Lisa.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for being here. Maybe we can start by having you just give a little bit of background on yourself and Intelsat.
Sure. I joined Intelsat about 3 years ago to start the land mobile business. I think as many in the industry are aware, Intelsat has historically been more of a capacity player, but over the last several years has been moving more and more into managed services. Prior to joining Intelsat, I spent about 9 years at Inmarsat, which is really where I guess, gained most of my experience in land mobility. Prior to that, I did a few gigs more in traditional telecom, starting off with working on cellular joint ventures in Russia, of all places, and then sort of moving from there to London, back to the US, and working on other sort of fixed telecom services prior to moving into satellite about a little less than 15 years ago. Intelsat, as I said, is known for, I think, being probably one of the oldest and most established satellite operators, and historically very much a capacity player. With the managed services platform, the Flex platform that was introduced a few years ago, a number of service capabilities have been launched on that platform. One of the more recent ones being Flex Move, which is a service that my team and I brought to market just before COVID hit. So our timing was good on launch. It was February of 2020. But despite that, we have built a global network of distribution partners and are now seeing, a ramp in our business from those partners that literally cover every continent at this point. So FlexMove is a more traditional land mobile managed service, supporting both comms on the move and comms on the pause.
Wow, amazing. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about some of the key trends that are happening with land mobile right now.
Well, I think in terms of trends, I think where we're seeing a lot of traction at the moment. First responders who are definitely looking for higher throughput capabilities from compared to what they've had through traditional MSS players. We're also seeing a lot of interest across the government markets, as well as some commercial markets like mining and rail in particular. So I think those are some of the areas where we're seeing trends. We've had some very interesting use cases from a few customers. One that was published recently, the Royal Navy in the UK, deploying Flex Move for remote surgical procedures. I think you're probably well aware of this, as it was part of our submission for the awards with MSUA a couple months ago. Very interesting use case where they deployed Flex Move and were able to actually connect to specialists in central locations in the UK to support remote surgical procedures in the field. So a really great use case, both in the sense that it demonstrates the real power of satellite, the power of what the Flex Move platform can do, and delivers a real, truly life-saving capability. Another one of the use cases that we've documented with another partner in Brazil is connecting a train operated by a mining company. It's a large, well-known mining company. Can't name them based on the agreement with the customer, but they had a need to connect a train that runs over literally hundreds of kilometers that are entirely unconnected and moves both resource and people that work at the mine site between that mine site and a seaport and larger city. So really critical to their business operation in terms of being able to move that resource and to be able to monitor the operation of that train and to be able to track both the performance of the train and ensuring coordination of logistics with the resource that they're moving. But it also provided a really useful passenger connectivity solution, as these train rides can be several hours, if not a full day. So it allowed access not to full internet services, but to social media, to certain apps, and allow people to stay in touch and have access to some bit of entertainment through a connected platform.
Wow, what amazing use cases.
Yeah.
Right. So maybe you can talk a little bit about what you see as the most important role that the satellite industry is playing in the future of mobile connectivity.
I'd say it's probably the continuity of service. I think the internet and mobile devices have become so pervasive that not only are individuals and businesses highly dependent on them, but I think the tolerance for not being connected is extremely low. So satellite, as part of a network of networks, really brings a critical capability that ensures that any user has continuous connectivity, no matter where they're located. I think if we look historically at each terrestrial mobile generation, as the technologies have evolved, the geographic coverage has actually gotten smaller. So we have more and more areas that are not well connected by terrestrial networks. Typically, the population centers, main roadways will be, but for those that are moving in other areas, the need for satellite is only becoming greater. And I think there's a greater demand because of that desire to stay connected.
Sure. What do you see as some of the most significant changes that will be happening in the satellite industry over the next, I don't know, 24, 36 months, maybe 5 years?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I would say this network of networks concept, particularly one that is really 5G focused. If you
Mhm.
look at what Intelsat has announced with its next generation network strategy, we are building a software-defined network. It's software-defined satellites, a software-defined ground infrastructure with a 5G core. So with that 5G core, of course, it not only allows us to leverage developments that are taking place in the 5G ecosystem for certain devices and applications, but it also will facilitate a much tighter and more seamless integration with those terrestrial networks. So I think some of the greater developments are going to be around this development of network of networks that integrates both satellite and terrestrial, but not just with terrestrial networks. It's also integrating multiple satellite standards. So taking, say, a geo network like Intelsat operates today, potentially a future NGSO development, and even leveraging something like HAPS, the high altitude platforms, these aircraft that can provide actually direct 5G services to users on the ground from something that covers a much wider area, or could be used to fill a gap in a more dense terrestrial, where there's a less dense, I should say, terrestrial deployment of infrastructure.
Wow, fascinating. I think that's the first I've heard of using some of those other aspects. Everybody talks about terrestrial and satellite, so
Yeah, when
that'll
the
be fascinating.
Yeah, and it's the beauty of the software-defined network as well, is that moving to the software-defined, not just the geo satellites that will launch, but the software-defined ground infrastructure, paired with a smart device, will allow you to actually configure that device to leverage whatever combination of networks is needed for the customer's solution. So not every customer is going to need every single network that you may have available in this network of networks solution, but you can customize an offer for them that maybe leverages the geo, the NGSO, and the terrestrial, or just the NGSO and the terrestrial, whatever meets the requirement. So, besides, I think bringing together these different network capabilities, providing a more seamless or tighter integration, I think you also have the ability to really customize solutions that leverage just those capabilities that the customer really needs.
Sure. Does using the various networks introduce new security challenges?
No, I mean, I think the security is still going to be, you're going to have the same kind of security management, I think, on the space-based assets as well as the terrestrial network. And of course, a customer, or I mean, whether it's a customer or a specific solution that requires some sort of enhanced security, it certainly can be deployed over the top of those networks. So we're going to have the same kind of encryption, I would imagine, on any of the satellite assets that we operate. And at the ground layer, of course, there's the option either to terminate traffic directly into the internet or to provide a private connection from a teleport directly to the customer's network. So I think, yeah, security considerations are obviously going to be very similar, but I think the ability to address them will continue to be there and probably be even stronger. Um,
Got it. Got it. What would you say are the greatest challenges to delivering a commercial satellite service to the market today?
I think probably the biggest challenge that we're finding, particularly with the FlexMove service, is user terminals that are sort of optimized not just for delivering the highest speed, but sort of optimized for the various use cases that exist across the land mobile market. There are so many different verticals and so many different user requirements that I think what I've seen is that you've got the sort of new terminal ecosystem all kind of racing to get to the fastest, highest performing terminal, which is great because we definitely have users that want that. And then on the other end, you have a number of new IoT type platforms, but there's a big gap in the middle. I think there are a lot of use cases in the middle. They don't necessarily need they don't need the highest speed. They don't necessarily want an IoT type platform, and they have budget constraints that say that instead of spending $30,000 on a terminal, they want to spend 5 or 7 or 8. I think what I'd really love to see from these new platform developers, whether it's the ones operating in the IoT space or the ones kind of racing for the best performance, is to look at leveraging their technology for other options in between, to see them delivering more of a family of terminals that meet different use cases at different price points, different form factors. So I think that's one of the bigger challenges. The cost of satellite services has come down, significantly. If you look at the pricing that we're offering on FlexMove today, it's really compelling, and it is significantly lower than what's been available historically for a land mobile service. So, if you look at the total cost of ownership, the biggest component of that is still the hardware. And so I think anything we can do, whether it's driving volume, but also working well, and in fact, on the volume question, I think for the vendors, I think by delivering a suite of terminals that meet different needs, I would actually think the total volume of sales would only increase for them, rather than just pursuing that niche that looks for the very high performance capability.
That's great. Yeah, having come from that end of the industry, that's a really interesting perspective. So, there's an opportunity perhaps there that maybe we,
Yeah.
folks in that aspect of the market haven't maybe been aware of. So
I
great.
think there is an opportunity, and it's certainly a message we're trying to communicate. I think because we're sort of in that position of delivering the service and developing the channel to market, there's the third piece of that solution besides the solution partner that brings value adds and the customer expertise. There's Intelsat that brings the service offering. There's that third piece, which is the hardware and the enabler of the service that I think that needs to be focused on a bit more.
Sure. How big of a role does size and weight play into that as well? So you kind of have that performance, but what about
Yeah.
size and weight?
No, it plays a big role depending on the asset you're trying to connect. I mean, if you're connecting a large piece of mining equipment or putting it on a locomotive, size and weight is probably not a huge consideration, although it still is. We've certainly found that. But as you try to move into some of the markets, say some of the other fleet markets, road transport, large trucks, you have a lot of satellite deployments in that space, typically on lower data rate messaging platforms. But as those truck platforms are moving more and more towards autonomy or more software based, the need for a bigger pipe to connect them, whether it's for delivering software updates or having the ability to take control of an autonomous asset if there's some anomaly, they need a larger pipe. But because those assets are typically operating on roads that are heavily covered by terrestrial networks, they don't necessarily want to invest as much. They don't necessarily need as big a pipe from the satellite side. They want something that provides them, a good failover, a good sort of continuity of service when they go in and out of terrestrial coverage. And the size, the weight, and the price point are definitely big factors in them making a decision to connect hundreds or thousands of vehicles across, a large fleet.
Sure, sure. From a user perspective, what are some of the criteria that users should be considering as they are looking at services to connect, especially from a land mobile perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I think, certainly they're going to want to look at, I guess, the overall quality of service that's available. I mean, we see a lot of the new sat companies coming onto the scene, and I think there's a lot of hype around them and a lot of questions about exactly what they'll be able to offer. Typically, they seem to be focusing more on the consumer broadband markets today, but of course, we expect that they will start to become more active in some of the business or commercial markets as well. I would say, looking at quality of service, do you want a highly contended consumer network, or do you want one that is where the quality of service is managed to deliver something that's consistent or even to offer a committed information rate where it's needed for certain applications,
Mhm.
and is offering enough flexibility to configure a solution, that better meets your needs rather than just sort of an off-the-shelf, high use network. So I would say quality of service, flexibility, um, diversity in the service offering, the terminal offerings. All of these are things that need to be looked at.
Right, right. Are there things that users should be looking for as they are selecting or reviewing their satellite services partner or partners?
Yeah, so I guess it depends on which partner they're looking for. I mean, certainly, if they're looking, like we distribute only through this network of solution partners, so we're not selling direct to the end market. So certainly, I think they want to look for a solution provider that is able to provide not just the connectivity, but some of the value adds or applications that they may require, or at least be in a position to provide good support for them. I think they need to consider whether the service or whether they need a service that is more global in reach, or if it's more regional, and consider what the network offers. From the network perspective, I think they also want to understand that there's enough flexibility on the commercial models, to be able to customize a solution that best meets their needs. For example, with the FlexMove service, we offer the traditional sort of monthly 12-month term package where you buy a data allowance per month, but we also offer quarterly and annual options that are prepaid for those users whose usage patterns are maybe more event-based and less predictable, and also offering shared options where if you've got a fleet of terminals, you can actually bundle them into a shared plan and benefit from a pool of data that each of those can share without necessarily committing to a certain volume per terminal. So, yeah, I think there are a number of things that need to be considered. It's the flexibility, it's the coverage, it's the sort of the value adds and the support services that the service provider can offer, and then some of the commercial flexibility in terms of finding packages that meet your specific usage patterns and needs.
Sure. What are some of the most, I guess, significant value adds you've seen delivered in the marketplace?
Well, I'd say there's sort of the basic set, of course, things like VoIP and basic messaging platforms. But one of the areas where we're seeing a lot of demand is for higher resolution video. Whether it's on a rail system, whether it's on heavy equipment, whether it's for it could be for disaster response, for situational awareness. In fact, we provided some support for the recent earthquake relief in Haiti, and one of the use cases from the NGO that we were working with was to fly drones. I mean, kind of smaller drones to go over buildings in areas that had been affected by the earthquake to get a better view of exactly what had happened, and then connecting that back to the satellite terminal to upload and send that information off to a center that was doing the evaluation and assessing what kind of materials and what kind of physical support was required to address the situation. So yeah, I think there's a range of applications, but I'd say video is one that we're getting a lot of requests for. Certainly, offering basic VoIP and other capabilities is I think just kind of table stakes for a lot of the SPs. But
Sure.
yeah, so I
Right.
think
So, in terms of new technologies, what are those technologies that users really need to start looking at and getting smart on and, gaining knowledge about?
yeah. Well, I mean, they should look at FlexMove, Intelsat's product. I think we're the one of the newer land mobile services and offering very different capabilities from what the MSS guys can do. But also, I think looking at some of the new network developments, like the next gen network that we've also announced, this sort of 5G based network of networks that will enable a whole host of services and solutions through the combination of network capabilities, through the integration with terrestrial 5G operators, and even through the cloud services and the sort of configurable smart devices that will support everything from the different combination of modems that are required to access the various networks within that network of networks, to hosting an application client, doing some edge compute, to manage the amount of data that's actually being transmitted over the network. There's a lot of new developments coming in with these new networks that I think are going to make the solution much smarter and much more relevant and even more cost effective for the users. So I think, taking a look at what's being done, that's more specific. I mean, our markets are more business to business, not so much business to consumer. So I would say, for those business and government users, looking what's being done by operators like Intelsat that are really focused more on the needs of those kinds of customers rather than the large consumer-focused networks. So I think there's a variety of new technologies being rolled out to really make the network much more simple to use, but also to make the solution much more relevant to each of the unique users that come onto the network.